Welcome to my first and potentially only OC family spotlight. In this speed paint, I am drawing Amy Chevalier, the mother of the family I will be discussing today. This would be her in her teenage years. A lot of my OC lore is kept in my head, so this won't be a perfect timeline of events, and I'll primarily be discussing basic information on each family member and a rough outline of the events in their life. Before we begin, I would like to provide some context on the world in which my OCs live in to make things a little less confusing to those who are unaware. The country in which all my OCs live in is a fictional country named Osclar, located off the coast of the United States, just between Bermuda Island and Nova Scotia. The climate is quite similar to the northern east coast of America, which it sits next to. Obviously, this world is an alternate history to our own, one in which Osclar exists. I won't get too into the history of the country as it's not exactly very important, and I hope to discuss that in a future video. However, what you do need to know is that in the current year in the world is 2051. I don't have much time to go into a tangent about why this takes place in the future. I'll probably make a video on that later as well. Another thing before we begin is some trigger and content warnings. My writing here and my audio will contain themes in the story of transphobia, ableism, death, illness, neglect, mental health, and more. This is your warning. If any of that stuff gives you bad stuff or bad vibes or triggers you, skip this one and watch another video of mine, please, and thank you. To begin, I will discuss the head of the family and the holder of the surname originally, Jean-Claude Chevalier, a 65-year-old man using he/him pronouns. Born on June 5th, 1986 in a small town in France, Jean was the middle child of a family of 3. He was never expected much by his strict and emotionally distant parents, which never seemed to bother Jean as a young boy. Even when his little sister passed away due to illness, his parents didn't pay him any more attention. Jean never craved that attention either, seeing the result of the attention his older sister got, just leading her to increasing stress and yearning for succeeding. Jean, despite everything that he would become later in life, was still a child, who cared for his little sister dearly. Ever since she was born, she had always been rather weak and ill, and while his older sister was busy with her studies and trying to impress her parents, Jean stayed with his little sister. Ever since he was little, he had always been introverted and calm, but his sister dying morphed these traits into being aloof and cold to others. He was smart and naturally had one of the highest grades in his classes, yet he never had any friends and always kept to himself, much to the concern of his teachers. He had only been dragged through life up until he became an older teen. At this point, his sister has graduated, moving on to apply for several art schools that she had been working towards her whole life. Jean himself had always been interested in something creative, such as writing or piano, but not wanting to overshadow his sister and upset her, he decided to take a different path. He had always been good at school, particularly foreign languages, so he decided to become a teacher, where in his studies he met Amy Leon, who was assigned to work with him on a project. Jean never really cared for her, but she seemed rather infatuated with him. His sister was doing just fine, so he thought of doing something what he normally did, trying to blend in and be as average as he could possibly think of. He started dating her, and thought of graduating, getting a nice job, and settling down. Those were the things others would expect of him. So that's what he would do, and this was the easiest way to do so, as she was already interested in him. He wasn't particularly happy with it, but his sister would be proud of him and he would be meeting expectations, which is all that really mattered to him. Amy was younger than him, about 4 years. Jean had taken a gap year, which meant that Amy would still be studying while he would have graduated. 2 unexpected things occurred not long after his graduation. A job offering to be a French teacher in a private religious school in Holmesboro, Osclar, a small, unremarkable job at a school that paid well in a small, unremarkable town in a small, unremarkable country. It was perfect for him. The surprise came when Amy told him she was expecting a child, which had utterly freaked out, the only now starting to rebel against her formerly sheltered religious upbringing she had. Having a child before marriage was something she was entirely against, and something Jean's career would likely be against as well, which made things too complicated for him. His life was supposed to be easy and fall into place. His parents wouldn't exactly be happy with him if they found out about this. So Jean told Amy that if she wanted to deal with this properly, she would continue her studies in Oscar while he taught there, and the two would get married before the child was born, and if she didn't come along, Jean would have nothing to do with her or the child ever again. This shocked the already anxious and scared woman, but she felt as if she had no choice and went along with it. As planned, Jean took the job. Amy transferred to a school a little while away in Costa Lila, Oscar. They got married quickly at a town hall with little fanfare. Amy gave birth to a little girl named Monique about 9 months later. It had been hectic, but Jean's life was following just about as well as everyone had expected. Besides taking a job in another country, his life wasn't too out of the ordinary. Once Amy had finished school, she had moved to Holmesboro with Jean, taking a job as the religious education teacher at the school Jean worked at, bringing Monique and her recently second-born child, who at the time was believed to be a little girl by their parents. The second child set a screw loose in Jean. This child had several complications, being blind and born with platinum blonde hair and incredibly pale skin, and on top of that, light blue eyes. The baby looked nothing like himself or Amy. Jean instantly assumed that Amy had cheated on her. Sure, he knew that the child had been born with albinism, but he still didn't think the child was his, which threw an angered wrench in the idea of his uncomplicated average life. After yelling at Amy and berating her for something he had no proof of, he eventually got word he was the father, but this didn't calm him down. He still didn't want the child. They made the life Jean imagined for himself different. Nothing in reality was wrong with the child, but Jean believed so, which only further sent the life he wanted down the drain. Amy started to become more wary and bitter towards her husband once her third child, Yvonne, was born. She truly had loved Jean, and he was the only one she had ever felt something for, but now he was treating her differently, and she blamed all of it on her second child. As the years went by, the parents grew angry and bitter with each other, but especially with their second child, who told his parents that he was their son. Amy didn't seem to have much of a problem with this until she was still rather cruel to him, insisting that she must choose his name for him, Jeremy, and that she wouldn't be the one paying for anything that he needed. Jean, however, reacted much more explosively, as this was another, what he thought, a quote-unquote not normal thing. He didn't think it was normal and started to lose faith in his choices. He thought that maybe he should just have become a writer or pianist and stayed single and childless forever in France. His hatred clouding his view, the three children were treated rather poorly, their parents often distancing themselves from their children. But the long verbal braiding often befell onto Jeremy and Monique, the former for what was explained before, and the latter for being conceived before her parents were married. The three children distanced themselves, except Yvonne, who still craved love and attention from her parents, which she never got. Jeremy was caught up in some crime that Amy and Jean didn't pay much attention to. Besides yelling at Jeremy for bothering the police, Monique ran away at 17, which Amy and Jean, yet again, didn't pay much attention to and didn't report. She would turn 18 soon anyways, and Yvonne, who stayed longer, still clinging on to some form of hope after cutting out both Monique and Jeremy from her life for several reasons. But eventually, she left too, leaving both husband and wife to hate each other and become more and more bitter, but the both of them too tired to bother with divorce. Amy Celine Chevalier, or formerly known as Amy Celine Leon, is a 61-year-old woman who uses she/her pronouns. From this point forward, the backgrounds of each character will likely be much shorter, as I covered most of it in Jean's background, but I will provide more detail with the beginning of Amy's life here. Amy Celine Leon was born as the eldest child of an overly religious Leon family in France, her date of birth being December 13th, 1990. She was heavily sheltered as a child and was pressured into being very diligent with her studies and every subject. She was good at English, French, instruments, math, science, history, and more. All of her subjects were the ones she excelled in. Her parents were proud of her, despite Amy feeling herself not being that happy with the state of things, especially how she was often picked on by her peers. But her life at home became unhappy as well when her little sister was born. They had a 10-year age gap. Which, after her sister was born, they paid more attention to her. Her name was Chloe. Which the former only child, Amy, was heavily annoyed by. She was also pulled out of several classes in school due to her parents sheltering her, and she wasn't allowed to use computers or the internet. All this sheltering was the only attention she would get from her parents, and it deeply frustrated her, which she mostly blamed on her little sister, who hadn't exactly been asked to be born. She grew more and more unhappy and frequently depressed and bullied in school, until she graduated. With no friends and no positive relationship with any of her family, she quickly saved up to move out and started going to college to get a degree in education. The new setting allowed her to do the things that she never had done, such as go on the internet and learn new things, which started the rebellious streak in her, although she still kept a lot of her core religious values. In her first year, she met a man who she was deeply infatuated with, and you likely know what happens next. The rest of her life isn't pretty, and it's only made even worse in her adulthood, when, in 2036, her sister Chloe dies in a fire. She hadn't kept in contact with her sister, but it seems she ended up moving only about 7 hours away from Amy in Osklar. She was asked if she would take custody of Louis, her nephew, but she refused. Monique Genevieve Chevalier is a 30-year-old woman who uses she/her pronouns and is the firstborn of Jean and Amy. Monique was born in France on November 10, 2021. As a young girl, Monique was a bit of a tomboy and often spoiled by her mother Amy, who she lived with in Costa Lila until her brother was born, and she, Jérémy, and Amy moved in with Jean. Monique never liked her father, and as her mother grew more distant, Monique blamed her father for everything. She was rather overprotective of her brother Jérémy, and later her little sister Yvonne, so much so that when Jérémy was being bullied in school, she would beat his bullies black and blue until she would get suspended, which Jérémy appreciated a little, but didn't like being treated like a baby. Monique would also do little jobs around the neighborhood, like raking leaves or shoveling snow, to get enough money to buy Jérémy glasses that would help him see, and a stick that would help him navigate better, which Jean and Amy had never bothered buying him, which quite worried the teachers at school, who in turn called social workers, who never exactly did much about it. Jérémy was grateful, but still wished his sister wouldn't be so overbearing, and eventually he distanced himself from Monique, whose anger issues only began to grow. Monique got into several more fights as she got older, eventually being expelled in her first year of high school and being forced to do online school. She had gotten in with bad crowds while attending school and often hung out with them, the teens often doing drugs or vandalizing or shoplifting at several locations. After a nasty fight with her siblings and father, she ran away at 17. She didn't know what she wanted to do with her life, not having any particular interests or talents outside of fighting and breaking things. So when she graduated, she moved from staying at her friend's house in a small town near Holmesboro to a big city, Twin Cape City, where she and her school friends got into similarly bad crowds. Monique worked odd jobs here and there and eventually wound herself up in several gangs or crime groups. One in particularly she did jobs for several times, which escalated in illegality each time, which she didn't seem to care about until she was ordered to kill someone, in turn for shelter in the group and being able to climb up the ranks. Monique wavered, but with her rent racking up, she did it. After meeting up with Yvonne and Jérémy, who didn't know her true colors but could still tell something was off, the two cut her out of their lives. Although the meetings were separate, as Monique had learned that Yvonne had cut contact with Jérémy a while back. This made Monique feel like a failure as big sister, and loaded herself up with work for her boss, which eventually brought her up high in the ranks. She had lost almost any sense of morality and only did what it took to sustain herself and make it to the top. Eventually, she was the second in command, and on one fateful night, she assassinated her boss and took the position of leader in the group, which she did perfectly in the eyes of herself. She was feared and made a lot of money. She never let anyone get too close to her, knowing that someone could do the same to her as what she did to her boss. Jérémy Juliette Chevalier is a 27-year-old man who uses he/him pronouns. Jérémy was assigned female at birth. and was born on October 25th, 2024. At an early age, he moved in with his father, where his development was made difficult by the constant yelling he heard as an infant and the lack of attention his parents gave him. His first memory was sitting in the car with his sister and his mother, who took him to the eye doctor, where Monique bought him his first pair of glasses. Jeremy, due to the lack of melanin in his eyes, was blind, only being able to see very up close to his face, but with the glasses, he was able to see just a bit better. From this point on, he got incredibly attached to Monique, as she was the closest person to a parent he had, and he would often refuse to sleep in a separate room as her or let her leave to school. And when she would go, he would sob until she would come back. When starting school, he got a magnifying device as a present from her that he could use to read books better. Most of the kids in his class believed him to be odd, which was only heightened by the fact that he had only recently come out as transgender. One boy decided to talk to him, however, and he wasn't mean at all. His name was Gabriel Labrador, and the two would play together after school every day. With how annoyed Jeremy was of his sister babying him, his new closest person was to Gabriel. The two would often spend every day together, as it was Jeremy's only escape from his home life. However, in middle school, Gabriel started avoiding him, after some kids started picking on him and spreading rumors about him. This deeply upset Jeremy, who kept trying to see Gabriel and kept trying to be friends with him again, and he couldn't possibly understand why he would leave. Jeremy even went to Gabriel's house, begging for an answer, which he was then escorted away by the police for causing a disturbance. Eventually, though, Gabriel yelled at Jeremy, calling him weird and creepy, saying he just wanted to be left alone. And then Gabriel moved away. Jeremy was distraught and curled back up into his little shell, becoming almost like his father in a way. Jeremy became much more rude and angry towards others, and when he moved out, excited to get away from his parents, his sister Yvonne begged him to stay, telling him that she couldn't stand being left alone. But Jeremy said that he needed to leave, and he did, leaving Yvonne behind and causing Yvonne to resent her brother for it and never speak to him again. Jeremy moved around quite a bit, getting a degree in psychology, but not doing much with it besides hopping around part-time jobs. Eventually, he met an older gentleman in Kawasaki named Akira Nakamura, who ran a private detective agency. The older man was clearly not well, and Jeremy wasn't either. After all, he had avoided others in fear of being abandoned again or them becoming different, like Monique. But Jeremy felt that he had to help Akira, and the only way he knew how was to get a job at his place, convincing Akira into it by using his degree. He got the job, and while Akira was quite distant, eventually he warmed up to Jeremy. Jeremy used the tricks he learned to help his new boss, teaching him how to cope, and eventually Akira was doing better. One day, Akira gave Jeremy his coat, telling Jeremy to take his own advice, and that since Akira was older, he should be the one helping the boy. Jeremy was taken aback, and started to accept Akira as the father figure who actually loved him and cared for him. They had a few other employees, but Jeremy was always closest to Akira, and the two started having a father and son type relationship, and Jeremy got increasingly better at his job, being paid well and eventually getting his own help, visiting a therapist frequently. He and Akira would have a few arguments and ups and downs, but the agency was doing well, and so were the two men. Yvonne Quincy Chevalier is a 25-year-old woman who uses she/her pronouns. Yvonne was born in Holmesboro, Oscar, on August 7, 2026. As a young girl, Yvonne constantly craved attention and love from everyone, which she only ever got from her siblings, but she didn't stop to try and do everything to make her parents pay attention and love her. She loved her siblings, but they would never replace having a parent's love. Yvonne would fake sick, try and get the best grades in class or impress her parents, but nothing ever worked. And she ended up noticing she was always being left behind. Monique paid more attention to Jeremy, which Yvonne never blamed on either of them, but it still made her sad. She had friends in school, but she never had a best friend or anyone she was particularly close with. She wasn't particularly good at one thing or the other, and she wasn't interested in a lot of things besides very feminine things like flowers and dresses, which her siblings and most of her school friends didn't really care about, and those were things she was certain she could never make a career out of. This made Yvonne incredibly depressed, and she believed she would never make it past 13 years old. However, she did. She never had the motivation to actually do anything to herself, and she felt just as her father had so many years ago, being dragged through life. The only emotions she felt being sorrow and pain as her friends at school would come and go. Her grades would always be underwhelming or painfully average, and no matter what she did, no matter what sports teams or clubs or hobby she tried, her parents were never paying attention to her or being proud of her. So when Monique ran away, Yvonne still held out hope. After all, she left a letter behind and promised to visit. But Jeremy would be leaving for good, and even if he did visit, she couldn't bear living at home without him, and she begged that he stay. When he left, she decided to never speak to him ever again. Eventually, she moved out, getting an average part-time job and going to an average college, getting an English degree, as that was her best subject, after all. When she graduated, she had repeated the same cycle, making friends who came and went and having average grades, all while she was never happy. And eventually, she decided she needed a change after browsing online and seeing how happy everyone else was. Maybe she could go do something that she was really passionate for. She loved flowers a lot, after all, and the people in her new hometown sure did. So, on impulse, Yvonne opened a flower arranging business, which did better than she thought it would, although she had a rather awkward encounter with one Gabriel Labrador, who apologized to her about how he had treated her brother, but he seemed rather off. Yvonne told him to leave and that she didn't associate with her brother anymore. Yvonne started to feel happier, communicating and making long-term friends with the locals and attending events in places in town. She went outside more and met new people and ate new food and started to feel that this was what she was missing the whole time. As she became happier, she started to wonder if she should be in contact with her siblings again. And that so far is the story of the Chevalier family, which could very well change in the next few years or even few months. If you know these OCs well and are watching this, you'll probably be a little surprised at the changes I made to Jeremy's story in particular. I hope this was enjoyable, and please feel free to offer any critique or comments below, as long as you keep it polite and civil. I hope to make more content like this in the future, and some analysis and talk about characters from other media who aren't my OCs. And with that out of the way, thank you for watching. Anonymous bids you adieu.